Hey guys, I'm Jamie Johnson, the Budget Epic Home Theater guy. Today we're talking about one of the best bargains in high-end audio that almost nobody seems to talk about anymore, the Outlaw Audio 2200 and the newer Outlaw Audio 2220 monoblock amplifiers. And I've got some opinions. Are the newer Outlaw Audio Model 2220 amplifiers actually better than the legendary Outlaw Audio 2200s? If you're shopping used, should you save a pile of money and buy the older model? Can these relatively inexpensive monoblocks actually make power-hungry speakers like the KEF R3 and KEF R7 come alive? And perhaps most importantly, can a pair of amps that often sell for under $500 used really hang with speakers costing $5,000, $10,000, or even $20,000? Spoiler alert, I think they can. Now, before we get started, I'm not one of those people who believes every amplifier has some magical unicorn dust sprinkled inside that completely transforms your system. I tend to be pretty practical. If an amplifier is well designed, has enough power, enough current, and isn't clipping, most of the improvements are going to be subtler rather than life-changing. So let's dive in. And I'll explain why I ended up buying the older 2200s instead of the newer 2220s, and I'll help you decide which amplifier is best for you. Let me take a step back and tell you how I came about owning a pair of Outlaw Audio 2200 monoblock amps. I replaced my old KEF Q50 speakers, which I loved, with a pair of KEF R7s. My Denon 3600H AVR that powers my 7.2.4 home theater didn't have any problems powering my old speakers, but I found when listening at louder volumes, particularly to Dolby Atmos music at higher volumes, my new R7s sounded a bit strained. They seemed to be held back a bit and they lost some of their punchiness and clarity. So being a man, I figured the answer was,
you know, men, we want a job done right and we want it done quick. What do we need? More power! Darn right, more power.
So I added the Outlaw Audio 5000X amp, which gave me 120 watts into 8 ohms for all channels driven. I saw an improvement, but it still felt the R7s were a little bit restrained. So being a man, what did I do?
More power! Darn right, more power.
So this time I went with the sledgehammer approach, keeping the 5000X amp for the rest of my bass layer speakers, but adding the Outlaw Audio 2200 monoblocks to each of my front stage left and right R7 speakers. This made them sing. More than enough power to bring out the little nuances and punch that the R7s were capable of during high volume music sessions and dynamic movie scenes. Let's get into the details, starting with the 2200. This amplifier has developed something of a cult following over the years. Outlaw rates it at 200 watts into 8 ohms and a whopping 300 watts into 4 ohms. And one thing I like about the Outlaw is they have a reputation of being fairly conservative with their power ratings. Unlike some manufacturers that seem to measure power output on a cool Tuesday morning with the moon in the correct phase, Outlaw has always published believable real-world numbers. The amp uses a Class G topology, weighs a respectable 18 pounds, includes both RCA balanced XLR inputs, supports 12-volt triggers, and was manufactured in Taiwan. Sound-wise, I describe the 2200 as neutral, with a touch of warmth. Not clinical, not sterile, not trying to impress you with fake detail. It simply gets out of the way and lets the speaker do their thing. The first time I hooked up my R7s to them and played them at a moderate listening level, I noticed no obvious changes in the sound signature. What did happen, particularly at higher volumes, is the bass got a little tighter, the imaging was excellent, the soundstage got a bit bigger than you might expect from an amplifier at this price point. Most importantly, it sounded effortless. And that's a word you'll hear me use repeatedly throughout this review. Now let's talk about the newer 2220s. On paper, the specifications are remarkably similar. Still 200 watts into 8 ohms, still 300 watts into 4 ohms, still Class G, still designed around the same basic amplifier philosophy. The weight drops slightly to about 16.5 pounds, and manufacturing moved to China. According to Outlaw, the 2220 offers a quieter noise floor and some refinements to the overall design. Notice I said refinements, not redesign. This isn't a completely new amplifier. Think of it more like the second generation of a successful sports car. The engine is basically the same. The engineers just spent a few years fixing small things and improving the details. So what's under the hood of the 2200s? Let's talk about Class G, because every time someone hears Class G, they immediately think, wait, is that Class A? No. Is it Class D? No. Is it a transformer-powered flux capacitor? Also no, but that'd be cool.
It worked! It worked!
Class G is basically a very clever variation of a Class AB amplifier. The amp simply operates on lower voltage rails during normal listening and then switches to higher voltage rails when more power is needed. The result? You get much of the performance of a traditional Class AB design while generating less heat and consuming less power. It's kind of like driving a V8 that shuts down half the cylinders until you step on the gas. Inside you'll find a large toroidal transformer, a substantial capacitor bank, and a robust transistor output stage. In other words, the stuff you want to see. For my own setup, I ran some calculations using my KEF R7 speakers at my roughly 15-foot listening distance. Even during loud listening sessions with dynamic movie content, I'll probably not be exceeding about 110 watts per channel, which means my 200 watts available, I still have significant headroom. And headroom is what keeps music and movies sounding effortless instead of strained. One thing I really appreciate is that these amps run cool. In fact, Outlaw says you can stack them 3 high without issues. Try that with some giant Class A amplifier that doubles as a space heater. So what changed inside the 2220? According to Outlaw, the biggest change is the input stage. The front-end circuitry was updated to improve noise performance and compatibility with modern processors and preamps. The single path was cleaned up, noise rejection was improved, the overall noise floor was reduced. But here's the important takeaway. Outlaw didn't throw away the original design. They refined it. Same Class G topology, same power rating, same effortless sound, same overall amplifier architecture. The DNA is still very much the same. Let's take a look at the rear panel. If you've owned one amplifier, you've probably seen most of this before. The 2200 includes RCA and XLR inputs, a 12-volt trigger input, heavy-duty speaker terminals, and a standard IEC power connector. Everything is straightforward. No mystery switches, no secret audio file settings, no button that costs an extra $1,000 because it says reference on it. Just the connections you actually need, and a very good quality build and materials. So what's new on the 2220? The most notable addition is the input sensitivity and noise switch. This keeps optimization gain structure and can reduce hiss in certain systems. Now let's talk about hiss for a moment. Because if you spend enough time reading audio forums, you'll eventually find someone talking about Outlaw audio either was humming or hissing or buzzing or summoning demons. In my experience, the 2200 and my KEF R7's speakers, everything worked out of the box and as expected with no issues. I can hear a faint hiss from about 2, maybe 3 feet away, but once I move further back, nothing. At my listening position, absolutely nothing. It's a complete non-issue. The 2220's updates help address situations where users experience noise issues, but honestly, many of these cases are actually caused by ground loops and other equipment in the system, and not these amps. The chassis has also been refined. The fit and finish is nicer in the latest edition as well. Overall, the changes of the 2220 are evolutionary rather than revolutionary. So why did I buy the 2200? This is where things get interesting. I paid $195 per amp on eBay. Let that sink in. For less than the cost of some audiophile power cords, I bought a 200 watt monoblock amplifier. Actually, two of them. I've never personally seen a used 2220 show up on eBay, and I kept hoping they would. And honestly, I have no problem buying used amplifiers. A well-built amplifier can easily last decades. The funnest part? The seller shipped my amps in an Anthem MCA 525 Gen 2 box. That's a 5-channel amplifier that roughly runs $3,700. Naturally, I asked him if his new Anthem amplifier sounded better. His response was, quote, "Perhaps soundstage presence is a bit more notable. With the price, only kinda better." And honestly, that's one of the most realistic amplifier comparisons I've ever read. A lot of people expect a new amplifier to completely transform their system. Usually it doesn't. If you don't have a good subwoofer yet, spend your money first there. That will probably make a bigger difference. Not that a good amp doesn't make a difference, however. The 2200's biggest strength is value. The performance to dollar ratio is absurd. Would I prefer the 2220s? Oh, heck yeah. But only for one reason in my use case. The 2200s look a little plasticky and less refined than the 2220s, in my opinion. Probably more than any other thing that made me want the 2220s was so they would match my Outlaw Audio 5000X amp in my AV rack with the cool periwinkle glowing button. But since I'm not the luxury home theater guy, my good wife would perfectly be happy watching movies on a 1970s black and white TV, I opted for the less expensive 2200s. Do I regret it? Sonically, not at all. But every time I look at my rack, I do think how cool it would be to have those 3 periwinkle buttons glowing. So Outlaw versus Emotiva. I would say the closest competitor when it comes to the Outlaw model blocks would be the Emotiva BassX A1, which costs about $100 more at the time of this publishing. Both are excellent values. The Outlaw runs cooler thanks to the Class G design. I find it slightly more neutral. The Emotiva has a little more of a forward energy, a little more excitement color added to it. Some people will love that. Audiophile types typically don't, however. For me, if you're buying speakers like the KEF R3 or KEF R7, specifically because you appreciate neutrality, accuracy, and clarity, then the Outlaw is the better match. Why buy an amp that adds color to the sound if you love the speakers you bought? The Outlaw simply lets the KEFs be KEFs. One of the most interesting listening sessions I've had involved the Outlaw 2200 powering a Wilson Audio Watt Puppy speakers. These are speakers that cost roughly $20,000, and honestly, the 2200 never seemed outclassed. The imaging was spectacular, the detail retrieval was fantastic, the soundstage was enormous, the bass was tight and controlled, and when the music demanded impact, the amp delivered. At no point did I sit there thinking, wow, these speakers are really being held back by this amplifier. That thought never crossed my mind. Now I have to admit, I only got to listen to one song, but it left me thinking that the Outlaw 2200s are more than enough amp for most speakers. Now let's talk about the speakers many of you probably care about most, the KEF R3 and R7. As I said before, I personally own the non-Meta R7s. I bought them on clearance when the Meta versions were being released, and I saved thousands. And while I haven't owned the Meta versions, their amplifier requirements should be very similar. Yes, one is listed as a 4 ohm speaker and the other is an 8 ohm speaker. But to keep things brief and not getting into long discussions of how ohm power ratings work, let's just say the power ratings of the Meta and non-Meta are basically the same. There are 3 absolutely benefits from dedicated amplification. Bass authority improves, dynamic improves, the soundstage expands, everything sounds more effortless. The R7 benefits even more. Bass control improves. Image sharpens, dynamic headroom increases. For me, even during Dolby Atmos music sessions above 90 and 100 dBs, the Outlaws never felt stressed. Both musics and movies sound absolutely effortless. Now, technically, these speakers aren't impossible to drive, but they can dip down to 3.2 ohms. And if you've spent any time on KEF's forums, you've probably seen the same comments over and over. They really love power. And it's true, these speakers absolutely come alive with good amplification. What I love most is that both the KEFs and the Outlaws share the same philosophy: neutrality, control, clarity. Neither one is acting like some hot girl in the room and everyone's trying to impress her with coloration and tricks. They're simply trying to reproduce what's on the recording. And when you combine those two things together, the results can be pretty special. So where does that leave us? If you're buying used, the Outlaw 2200 remains one of the best bargains in high-end audio, period. If you're buying new and want every refinement available, then the 2220 is the best choice. But don't expect night and day differences. If I were to put you into a room blindfolded and did A/B listening testing to the 2200 and the 2220 amps, I guess most people wouldn't be able to tell much of a difference, if any difference at all. For those who can, what you'll notice with the 2220s is a little refinement, not transformation. At the end of the day, at their price point, both amplifiers deliver what matters most: excellent power, excellent current delivery, excellent imaging, excellent soundstage, excellent build quality, and the ability to drive demanding speakers without breaking a sweat. If you find a used 2200 at a good price, buy it. If you want the latest version and a nicer looking amp, buy the 2220. Either way, you're going to get one of the best amplifier values in high performance audio for their price point. And honestly, in a hobby where people routinely spend thousands of dollars chasing tiny improvements, that's something worth celebrating. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in our next video.